Okay, give me 1 second. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Paranormal and Historic Locations and Legends. Tonight's episode, we're going to continue off from what we were talking about last week, which is the first time ever I've done a part two for a particular location. And of course, as you guys can clearly probably tell, we'll be continuing off on the Amityville horror. I've actually recently found some new information about this case that, strangely enough, they really there was not a lot of sites or really shows that really talk about some of the other things that involve this house, not necessarily paranormal wise, but some other major factors that kind of made the house even a little bit more famous, for lack of a better term. Just before I get started, I just want to give a quick shout out to everyone while I can still see the chat. Vivian, good to see you. Hello, Bridget. Thanks for tuning in. Okay, so I'm sure the comments, I'm sure I'm going to get more, but I do, as I always say before, I always do apologize if I don't reach out to everybody, because when I'm doing my slideshows, I can't see the comments then. So that's why I always check on the phone every once in a while, just give some kind of shout out. What's going on, Nicole? All right, now give me 1 second here. This is Robin. Hey, good to see you, Robin. Hey, Don. All right, so let me get the screen shared. I always have a problem here with sharing the screen. Okay, I don't know let's see here. Okay, I think it was this one. Okay, hopefully this works. And I don't know how. Oh, wait a minute. Hang on. That's somehow. Geez, I wish there was a better way that this can be shown. Hang on, what's going on here? Oh, looks like we got a storm coming. You guys can't hear it too well down here because I'm actually in the basement, but storm's coming, that's for sure. Could have been a perfect time. Thanks, Nicole. Thank you, Vivian. Here's just several groups. I assume that's Robin. Thanks, Robin. Nicole, I'm not entirely sure if it's tornadoes or not, because we have had some severe weather that was supposed to come our way. So even if it is, I'm obviously down in the basement, so I'm in the safest area. All right, let's try this again, because I don't know what just happened. Okay, let's try this. Hopefully this works. Yep, there we go. Okay, let me just check the screen to make sure this is working right, so that way you guys can see it too. Okay, perfect. All right, so obviously, like I said, so as a lot of you guys know from last week, we were talking about the DeFeo family, their lives living in that house, and of course, up to the time of their murder. As you could probably very well expect it, tonight, in this case, we'll be focusing on the Lutz family. Now, what we're going to do, because I'm sure a lot of us are friends with Christopher Quarantino, I will be telling first how the story is usually told, but then eventually, as the slideshow goes on, because I want to make sure that the true story is out there, I'm going to also tell exactly what really went on by the real kids, experience, for lack of a better term. Although, considering the amount of information I have, I also have a few videos to show as well, like I did last week. So it would not be the least surprising if this ends up becoming a part 3. But we'll just have to see how things go as the show goes on, obviously, because I only got an hour to do this. So, yeah, let's begin. So, obviously, like I said, we're going to be focusing on the Lutz family. Oh wait, you know what? Just forget it. So, about a year after the DeFeo family murders occurred, in December 1975, 28-year-old George and 29-year-old Kathleen Lutz and their three children, 9-year-old Daniel, 7-year-old Christopher, and 5-year-old Missy, moved into 112 Ocean Avenue. 112 Ocean Avenue during that time, however, remained empty for 13 months after the DeFeo murders. George and Kathy bought the house for what was considered to be a bargain price of $80,000. During their first inspection of the house, the real estate broker told them about the DeFeo murders of the previous November and asked if this changed their opinion about wanting to buy it. After discussing the matter, they decided it was not an issue. The Lutz family moved in on December 19th. Much of the DeFeo family's furniture was still in the house since it has been purchased. Oh, wait, hang on. Let me hide this. Just realized that's showing up. Since it has been purchased for $400 as part of the deal. A friend of George Lutz learned about the history of the house, and because of the terrible past of the home, and just to be on the safe side, insisted the Lutzes on having the home blessed. At the time, George was a non practicing Methodist and had no experience of what this would entail. Kathy was a non practicing Catholic and explained the process. George knew a Catholic priest named Father Ray who agreed to carry out the house blessing. In Anson's book, the priest is referred to as Father Mancuso for privacy reasons. The now deceased priest's real name was Father Ralph J. Pecoraro. That's it. Father Mancuso was a lawyer. Excuse me. Father Mancuso was a lawyer, a judge of the Catholic Church, and a psychotherapist who lived at the local Sacred Heart Rectory. He arrived to perform the blessing while George and Kathy were unpacking their, their belongings on the afternoon of December 18th and went into the building to carry out the rites. Now, as far as I know, this actually, aside from a interview of him in which he kept his identity hidden, this is as far as I know as being the only known photograph of him. And I believe those are two of the kids that he's with. Yeah, I think it is. Whoops, I typed the wrong way. When he flicked the when he flicked the first holy water and began to pray, he felt a cold presence and heard an audible masculine disembodied voice demanded that he get out. Shortly after, he was then physically slapped across the face by an unseen force while he stood alone in an empty room. When leaving the house, Father Mancuso did not mention this incident to neither George nor Kathy. As he drove back to the rectory, the bonnet of the priest's car flew open, smashing against his windshield. One of the welded hinges tore loose. The right door flew open, and the car stalled. The priest summoned a friend for help. Later, the windscreen wipers began to fly back and forth like crazy and couldn't be stopped. On December 24th, Father Mancuso telephoned George Lutz and advised him to stay out of the room where he had heard the mysterious voice. This was a room on the second floor that Kathy planned to use as a sewing room and also had formerly been the bedroom of Mark and John Matthew DeFeo. The telephone call was cut short by static, and following his visit to the house, Father Mancuso allegedly developed a high fever and blisters on his hands similar to stigmata. Every time he would attempt to help the Lutzes, the bleeding blisters would erupt on his hands. Telephone calls between the Lutzes and the priests were continually interrupted or cut off by loud noises and eerie sounds, making it impossible for them to talk. Now, sadly, Father Mancuso was said to have died sometime in the late 1980s, although his date of death is unknown. Now, At first, George and Kathy Lutz and their children experienced nothing unusual in the house. Talking about their experiences subsequently, they reported that as if they were each living in a different house. Some of the experiences of the Lutz family at the house have been described as follows. Now, the next few pages I have will probably be, as far as I know, everything that occurred in this house. Some of them will sound kind of a little bit similar to the other, but for the most part, I think it's probably the most collected I've ever gotten for such a case like this. Just before I get started, I just want to look on the comments here. What's up, Jeremy? Hey, Greg, good to see you. All right, now let me just I'm just doing a quick shout out over there. Okay. All right. So, anyways, George would wake up around 3:15 a.m. every morning and would go out to check the boathouse. Later, he would learn that this was the estimated time of the DeFeo killings. The house was plagued by swarms of flies, despite the winter weather. Kathy had vivid nightmares about the murders and discovered the order in which they occurred and the rooms where they took place. The Lutz children also began sleeping on their stomachs in the same way that the dead bodies in the DeFeo murders had been found. Kathy would feel a sensation as if being embraced in a loving manner by an unseen force. George and Kathy discovered a small hidden room around 4 feet by 5 feet behind shelving in the basement. The walls were painted red, and the room did not appear in the blueprints of the house. The room came to be known as the Red Room. This room had a profound effect on their dog, Harry, who refused to go near it and cowered as if sensing something negative. George later reported he saw the face of Robert DeFeo Jr. on one of the red walls, staring back at him. But as quickly as it appeared, it vanished. Now, one night, George heard his children's bed slamming up and down on the floor above him, but he was unable to do anything because he was held in his bed by an unseen force. Later that night, he woke to see his wife levitating and moving across the bed. She levitated about 30 centimeters above her bed on several occasions. That's crazy. There were cold spots and odors of perfume and excrement in areas of the house where no wind drafts or piping would explain the source. George couldn't get warm in the house for many days. He kept the fireplace burning day and night in a futile attempt to stay warm. Now, strangely enough, while tending to the fire, on one occasion, George and Kathy saw the image of a demon with half its head blown out. It was burned into the soot in the back of the fireplace. The Lutz's daughter, Missy, redeveloped. The Lutz's daughter developed an imaginary friend named Jody, a demonic pig-like creature with glowing red eyes. She often described the entity as my friend Jody, the biggest pig you ever saw. Now, obviously, right here, the picture here on the just to my left, where it shows the red room, that is the actual photo. That is the actual red room. As you could see, despite being called the red room, you could see that some of the paint had already been peeled off. I don't know if it was because it was just just old paint or what, but that's the actual red room. And then, of course, the photo obviously right next to it is nothing more than just a still. Some of these images I have here are obviously still shots from the movie, but on the very bottom, though, supposedly is an actual drawing of Jody that that Missy supposedly had written. Now, I don't know exactly what else all these other drawings are. I mean, all the other parts of the picture are, but you can kind of see that pig-like entity in that drawing. So, I know, very strange. Again, very, very kind of controversial because you really don't. I mean, up until recently, for years, we really didn't know exactly what was in fact the truth and what in fact has been made up. So, again, that's why when I started putting this one together, I thought I'd tell the stories that usually would be told before eventually we get to the true story of what really happened and kind of debunking a lot of this. But it's always just, I just thought I'd decide to add it because it's obviously one of the most, famous haunted house cases that we know of. So regardless, I just think it's always important to kind of show, kind of present, the way how it's told first before getting to the facts. Now, George would hear what was described as a German marching band, German marching band tuning up, or what sounded like a clock radio playing not on frequency. When he went downstairs, the noise would cease. Kathy would often feel invisible hands grabbing her. She once found red marks where the hands had been. In the early morning hours of Christmas Day, 1975, while checking the boathouse one night, George looked up and saw a pair of glowing red eyes looking at him, standing behind Missy at her bedroom window. When he ran upstairs to her room to investigate, he found her fast asleep, and there was nothing to be found, although her small rocking chair was slowly rocking back and forth. Later, it was suggested that it could have been Jody. George, now, this is kind of, whether this is true or not, this is still kind of creepy and bizarre, in my opinion. George realized that he bore a strong resemblance to Ronald DeFeo Jr. and began drinking at the Witch's Brew, a bar where DeFeo was once a regular customer. When closing Missy's window, which Missy said Jody climbed out of, excuse me, when closing Missy's window, sorry, I gotta, damn. When closing Missy's window, which Missy said Jody climbed out of and wanted to come inside, Kathy saw red eyes glowing at her. She then threw a chair through the window. She reported that there was a cry like that of a wounded animal, a long squealing. While in bed, Kathy received red welts, cuts, and bruises on her chest caused by an unseen force, and again was levitated 2 feet off the bed. Locks, doors, and windows in the house were damaged by an unseen force. The red eyes appeared later by the window near the staircase. When George ran outside, he found cloven hoof prints attributed to an enormous pig appeared in the snow outside the house on January 1st, 1976. Green gelatin-like slime oozed from walls in the hall and also from the keyhole of the playroom door in the attic. Of course, again, it's not really the actual slime. That's just obviously just a still shot, again, along with the picture above, still shots from the movie. But I thought it was important to kind of give some type of description in a way. A 12-inch crucifix hung in the living room by Kathy revolved until it was upside down, leaking a strange black liquid and gave off a sour smell. George tripped over a 4-foot-high China lion, which was an ornament in the living room, and was left with bite marks on one of his ankles. Later, this lion would reappear in the living room after George had moved it back upstairs into the sewing room. And that is the actual China lion in the house. It's, in fact, again, the only known photograph of the actual statue. George saw Kathy begin levitating and floated toward the open window. When George tried to pull her down, he saw her 30-year-old face transform into an old woman of 90. The hair wild, a shocking white, the face a mass of wrinkles and ugly lines, and saliva dripping from the toothless mouth. Missy would sing constantly in her room. Whenever she would go out of the room, she stopped singing. But going back to the room, she would go back to sing where she left off. Windows were constantly opening by themselves, then slamming shut. Doors were repeatedly, often ripped off their hinges in the house, even though they were securely locked. And similarly, George saw a white hooded figure in the fireplace on one occasion. If this was actually, the case, that almost makes it look like as if the fireplace is like some kind of gateway. And similarly to what I mentioned earlier, A sticky substance often oozed from the ceiling, stairs, and the door edges. The insides of the toilet bowls in two upstairs bathroom turned absolutely black, as though someone has painted them from the bottom to the edge just below the rim. Kathy had scrubbed both bowls with Clorox, but could not remove the substance. The Lutzes claimed while sitting downstairs, they always heard footsteps coming from the upstairs bedroom when no one was up there. A bartender who had worked at a party in the house at 112 Ocean Avenue when the DeFeos had lived there told Lutz that he had found the secret red room in the basement. He stated that he had nightmares about it for years. He told him that sometimes he dreamed that people were killing dogs and pigs in there and using their blood for some kind of ceremony. George and Kathy claimed they saw a face outside with glowing red eyes, peering in the living room window at them. When George threw an object at it, it ran away, squealing like a pig. On one occasion, Kathy heard what sounded like a window being opened and closed through the sewing room door, even though she was sure no one was in there. Man, that's quite a lot of supposed activity. But again, just remember here, folks. After deciding that something was wrong with their house that they could not explain rationally, George and Kathy Lutz carried out a blessing of their own on January 8th. George held a silver crucifix while they both recited the Lord's Prayer. And while in the living room, George allegedly heard a chorus of voice asking them, "Will you stop?" By mid-January, and after another attempt at a house blessing by George and Kathy, they experienced what would turn out to be their final night in the house. The Lutzes declined to give a full account of the events that took place on this occasion, describing them as too frightening. Although years later, George finally revealed what happened. Now, just before I get to that, I think out of the entire story this is where it gets to be the most controversial, because there's always supposedly different versions of what happened on that final night. And hearing now from, some of the, hearing from the kids that live there, I got a good feeling that even though I have the supposed story, like what happened, I'm hoping one day that, we'll definitely, I'm sure hopefully I'll have the information real soon to give off, what really, happened on that final night. But as George would supposedly say, as he said it, the final night the Lutz family spent in the house was, in George's words, the reason not to stay there anymore. I was lying in bed and everyone was asleep, and Kathy lifts off the bed and starts to slide away from the bed and away from me, Lutz said. I feel something get in the bed with us. I'm unable to move. I hear the kids' beds continually slamming up and down on the floor and being dragged. We heard these pigeons on the air conditioner top overhead from the master bedroom, and they're fluttering all night long. And yet there are no pigeons there the next morning, or any nests or anything like that. The lights flicker. We brought the dog up to stay right by the bedroom. We tied him right to the doorknob, and he's up, going in circles and throwing up all night. The boys came down in the morning absolutely frightened. They were unable to get down to me, and I was unable to get up to them. Missy came in and just asked what was that all about? And Kathy had no memory of much of it. That day, we spent trying to get a hold of Father Ray, and he said all the right words. On the afternoon of January 14th, 1976, George and Kathy Lutz, with their three children, Daniel, Christopher, and Melissa, and their dog Harry, left 112 Ocean Avenue, leaving all of their possessions behind. The next day, a mover came in to remove all of the possessions to send to the Lutzes. He reported no paranormal phenomenon while in the house. After getting in touch with Father Mancuso, The Lutzes decided to take some belongings and stay at Kathy's mother's house in nearby Deer Park, New York, until they had sorted out the problems with the house. They claimed at one occasion that the phenomenon followed them there, with the final scene of Anson's book describing greenish black slime coming up the staircase towards them. After fleeing the home in January, George and Kathy, with the assistance of Channel 5 News assistant 19-year-old Laura DiDio, contacted Ed and Lorraine Warren, a husband and wife of team of self-proclaimed demonologists. 20 days after the Lutzes fled, Ed and Lorraine Warren were called in by Marvin Scott, a news reporter with Channel 5 New York, who had covered the Amityville story and worked on a prior investigation with the Warrens. During the period in which the Lutz family shortly left 112 Ocean Avenue, Dr. Stephen Kaplan, a self-styled vampirologist and ghost hunter, was also called in to investigate the house prior to the arrival of the Warrens. According to Kaplan, on February 16th, shortly after the Lutzes abandoned the house, Kaplan received a phone call from George. At the time, Kaplan was the executive director of the Parapsychology Institute of America on Long Island and a frequent guest on the WBAB radio program Spectrum with Joel Martin. This initial conversation immediately aroused his suspicions as to the validity of Lutz's claim that the house was haunted. Kaplan claims Lutz asked about a fee for the group's services, and Kaplan told him that they do not charge for the investigation, but that if the story is a hoax, the public will know. Shortly after, Lutz called and canceled the investigation. George and Kathy claimed that Kaplan's credentials did not check out and that his claims to be a vampirologist made them wary of any involvement with the case. Kaplan also claimed to hold a PhD that he did not actually have. This was not the first time they were questioned either. Ed and Lorraine Warren had defended themselves with this when questioned about the Amityville horror conspiracy. Kaplan and the Lutzes had a falling out after Kaplan said that he would expose any fraud that was found. Kaplan went on to write a critical book titled The Amityville Horror Conspiracy with his wife Roxane Salch Kaplan. The book was published in December of 1995, less than 6 months after his death at the age of 54. Now, on to the investigational section. Just before we get started with this segment, I just want to once again just give a quick shout out to everyone who's watching. Well, that's okay. Just looking at Nicole's comments, that's really cool that Nicole, you're part of the Warren Legacy Foundation. That's awesome. Let's see who else. What's going on, David? Hi, Telly. Hello, Karma. Greg, what's happening, Greg? Long time no see you, right? Hey, Gary, good to see you. Julian, thanks for tuning in. What's up, Rob? Okay. So the first investigation that took place at the Amityville Horror House, which is where we're on now, a team of reporters, investigators, and parapsychologists were assembled by Ed and met at the home at 112 Ocean Avenue. The Lutz family refused to re-enter the home during the investigation. The Warrens first entered 112 Ocean Avenue on February 24th. That's my birthday. Lorraine described an overwhelming sense of sadness and depression throughout the entire home. After entering the basement, Ed felt a powerful, inhuman presence. It was as if I were standing underneath a waterfall, Ed recalls in a later interview. And the pressure was driving me down to the floor. And I commanded, in the name of Jesus Christ, what there was to reveal its identity. I understood right at this point that what we were dealing with was no ghost. This was no ordinary haunted house. After conducting their initial investigation, the Warrens put together a group of professional psychics to assist them in their findings. The Channel 5 news team, Marvin Scott, Steve Petropoulos, and Laura DiDio, covered the Warrens' investigation on the night of March 6. A friend of the Warrens, Mary Pascarella, traveled along the house during the March 6th investigation. Mary considers herself a time walker, a person who was able to sense and sometimes visualize past events in a particular location. The house at 112 Ocean Avenue was no exception. I began to say my prayers, and I was saying the Our Father, recalls Mary Pascarella in a 2002 interview. I looked out of the door, and I was saying the Our Father. There was a group of figures saying the Our Father backward. Mary was not the only one who experienced strange events that night. Channel 5 cameraman Steve Petropoulos reportedly suffered a rash of heart palpitations and shortness of breath while climbing the staircase. The Warrens say they also felt a cold spot on the staircase. A detail George Lutz has since said a detail George Lutz has since says he also experienced. Isn't that this? Oh, I thought that was the same picture. During the first, excuse me, during the first seance, Mary also became ill and was ushered out of the room. There seems to be some kind of black shadow that forms ahead and it moves, Mary claimed. And as it moves, I feel personally threatened. Another psychic, Alberta Riley, made similar claims during the seance. It's upstairs in the bedroom. What's here makes your heart speed up. My heart's pounding. Excuse me. Whatever is here, in my estimation, most definitely of a negative nature. It has nothing to do with anyone who had once walked the earth in human form. It is right from the bowels of the earth, insists Lorraine. Whatever is here is able to move around at will. It doesn't have to stay here, but I think it's a resting place. During the investigation, Ed was physically pushed to the floor while using some religious provocation in the basement. Lorraine was also overwhelmed by the sense of a demonic presence and was plagued by her psychic impressions of the DeFeo family's bodies laid along the floor, covered in white sheets, and a sense of physically being pushed back. During the course of the investigation, Gene Campbell took a series of infrared time-lapse photographs. Now, I'm sure you guys all know this photograph. I mean, I think just about everyone in the paranormal community knows this photo all too well. One of the images allegedly showed a demonic little boy with glowing eyes who was standing at the foot of the staircase, peering from the second floor. The photograph did not emerge into the public domain until 1979, when George and Kathy and Rod Steiger appeared on the Merv Griffin show to promote the release of the first film. The land was also found to be used by John Ketchum. John Ketchum was a practicing black magician in the 17th century and had a cottage on the land prior to the construction of the Dutch colonial in 1924. John requested that his remains be buried on that property, and they remain somewhere on the grounds to this day. In the late 1600s, Amityville was part of Huntington Township, a check of the Historical Society located in Huntington, a town approximately 13 miles from Amityville, revealed that there were several John Ketchums in the area. DeFeo's defense lawyer, William Weber, claimed that his research showed that the house was built on land owned at one time by John Ketchum. While the Ketchum family did own land in Amityville, and there is a Ketchum Avenue in the town, claims of a direct link with 112 Ocean Avenue remain controversial. Moreover, Jay Anson's book suggests that the property is cursed because it had once belonged to John Ketchum, a suspected witch, in this case, who had fled Salem, Massachusetts, before taking up residence in Amityville. The Amityville Horror website gives reasons why there are so many Ketchum locations around Ocean Avenue. It was a descendant of this John Ketchum by the name of Zebulon Ketchum, who would later become a major player in Amityville. Ketchum Avenue, near Ocean Avenue, is named for Ketchum, not his forefather. Zebulon Ketchum joined the local militia during the Revolutionary War, and in 1790, George Washington would have dinner at Ketchum's hotel at what was then called Huntington South. Ketchum was also a very well-known family that lived in Amityville within the 18th century. Many historical buildings were owned by them and are now museums in Amityville. However, surviving members claim that there was never a witch in the family. As to whether or not they ever owned the Ocean Avenue lot has never been verified. Oops, sorry, that was my fault. Because records of this time period are sketchy at best, there was no clear proof that any Ketchum ever resided on or near the property. The most definitive proof against any John Ketchum's being a witch came from the Ketchum family's own extensive research into their genealogy. After careful investigation, they have been able to determine that there was never a witch named John Ketchum. So it's quite obvious that we don't know if John Ketchum really was a real person in life, but we do know, though, that we're able to debunk the fact that he was never a witch to begin with, like it was shown in the films. And again, although there may have been a real John Ketchum who lived during the 17th century, the claims made about him in conjunction with the story are likely to be untrue, which I have to admit I do agree with. Let me just check on the time, see how much time we got. So we have about 20 minutes left. Let me just check on the. Hey, Justin, how are you? Just making a couple quick shout outs for those that I might have missed. Let's see here. Okay, I got to check again. I don't know why the comments appear separately from both networks. It's kind of weird. Okay. All right, moving forward. Now, interestingly, more enough, we're not only just talking about John Ketchum here that supposedly had owned the land that would become 112 Ocean Avenue, but more interestingly enough, the Shinnecock Indians also at one time had an enclosure on this land that was used to house the sick and the mad. Those in this enclosure were left to die. The Warrens believed that the suffering there had left the property with a very negative energy and dark history, and that such a negative history was a magnet for demonic spirits and the preternatural. The Warrens felt the house could only be saved through a cleansing performed by an Algican exorcist or a Roman Catholic priest. George and Kathy say they were not willing to take on this responsibility. They'd be putting their life in jeopardy. How can you go and ask someone to do that for a house? George lamented. George and Kathy decided they couldn't risk moving their children back into the house. They returned the property to Columbia Savings and Loan on August 30th. The Warrens believe these energies directly impact The Warrens believe these energies directly impacted the lives of both the DeFeos and the Lutzes. The Warrens retrieved a handful of the Lutzes' earthly possessions and deed for the property. The Lutzes sold the rest of their belongings and relocated to California. Now, interestingly enough, this next part I'm about to get to, this is something that for some reason whatsoever is not very much explained very much, because everyone usually kind of focused on the first investigation with the Channel 5 news team. But believe it or not, there were actually 2 other investigations of that house that I was able to uncover. Now, before, obviously I put this entire presentation together, I do know that they're actually, because the Channel 5 news team was there when they conducted this investigation, obviously they filmed a lot of it. And I do know that some of the footage does appear on some of the some of the documentaries that have been made over the years. I was hoping at some point that, especially in this day and age, we would be able to see like the entire news footage of the investigation of the house. But for some strange reason, I mean, I mean, unless someone unless they're willing to upload at some point, I don't know where exactly to find the full footage. I know the footage is still out there, but unfortunately, that entire footage, with the exception of just bits and pieces of it, the entire full investigation footage is unavailable, which in my opinion, I think it would have been really cool to add to this slideshow. So, but now getting to another part that is not very well talked about, and this is by someone else that I think a lot of us know very well. In January 1977, Hans Holzer and spiritual medium Ethel Myers entered 112 Ocean Avenue in Amityville. Myers claimed that the house had been built over an ancient Native American burial ground, and the angry spirit of a Shinnecock Indian chief, Rolling Thunder, had possessed the previous occupant, Ronald DeFeo Jr., driving him to murder his family, and whose body was buried on the side of the house. After Myers channeled the spirit of the chief, photographs taken at the scene revealed curious anomalies, such as mysterious halos which appeared in the supposed images of bullet marks made in the original 1974 murders. Holzer's claim that the house was built on Indian sacred land, however, was denied by the local Amityville Historical Society, and it was pointed out that it was the Monoket Indians and not the Shinnecocks who had been the original settlers in the area. Now, as far as I know, again, this is among these 2 photos they were basically the only known photographs I was able to find of this investigation. So it was that was quite a rare find that I was able to find them, because when I heard about the secondary investigation that took place at the house, I didn't really think I was going to really find a lot other than, exactly what happened this time. So, but of course, finding these 3 rare photographs, I should say, it's certainly better than nothing. Now, Holzer went on to write several books about the subject, both fiction and nonfiction, up till his death in 2009 at the age of 89. Now, of course, obviously, we can't forget about this when you think about this entire, paranormal case. Later that year, in September, Jay Anson wrote the book, The Amityville Horror, a true story which covered most of the events of what happened to the Lutz family. The Lutzes had sold the right to the book to Anson, who had aided and adapted to some of the Lutz's original claims. And believe it or not, I just grabbed this very quickly. I know my monitor's quite small, but well, wait a minute. I don't know if you're going to see it because of the screen. I'll show it later, but I do have a copy of the original book. In 1979, a film based on the book was also released, which starred James Brolin, Margot Kidder, and Rod Steiger. The on-location scenes of the Amityville Horror were filmed at a private residence in Toms River, New Jersey, which had been converted to look like the 112 Ocean Avenue home after authorities in Amityville denied permission for filming on the actual location. Which, understandably, I mean, as much as I think it would have been cool to actually have it shot in the real house, at the same time, though, it's kind of, an act of respect, in my opinion. So, that way, because, you do something like that, not only is it, going to end up as a tourist attraction, which it originally wasn't. At the same time, though, it just seems like it would just be kind of disrespectful, especially since an actual family died there. Now, additionally, exterior scenes were also filmed in Toms River and Point Pleasant Beach. Indoor shots were filmed at the MGM studio lot in Los Angeles, California. The film became one of the most successful films produced by by an independent studio at that time. It was a huge box office success. It was a huge box office success, earning more than $86 million. However, the film received poor reviews. It received mostly negative reviews from critics, though some film scholars have considered it a classic of the horror genre. Not to mention, of course, the haunted house genre, especially. Jay, on Sadly, Jay Anson died a year after the movie's release in 1980 at the age of 58. Since the release of the original film, it has spawned 11 official movies over a course of 40 years between 1979 and 2018. And when I say official movies, I don't know if you guys have seen recently, and this has been occurring now for over the last, I would say, about 5 or 6, maybe even 7 years now. There's been like, it disgusts me, to be honest with you, but there's been this whole collection of like low budget, mostly very terrible movies that have been coming out, um, that call themselves an Amityville film, but have no connection whatsoever to the Amityville horror whatsoever. They're literally just movies that just use it, probably in the hopes of trying to get more attention, more positive feedback. It would draw more audiences, but I would probably recommend right now, don't ever see these other movies that have been made in the last couple of years. They're still making them, actually, to this day. They are just absolutely terrible, and they have nothing to do with the house. I mean, if you actually look at some of the film, like these fan-made films that have been made, sometimes it will have some kind of image of the house, especially the classic eye windows. But aside from that, it has nothing to do with the house, the Amityville horror house whatsoever. So only look at the official movies, the official 11 movies that have been made between 79 and 18. Now, although I already talked about this briefly last week, in 1982, Amityville 2, The Possession was released, which serves as a loose prequel to the original film. George wanted it originally to be a sequel and wanted the sequel to the 1979 film to be based on the book, The Amityville Horror Part 2 by John G. Jones. But the producer, Dino De Laurentiis, secured a deal with American International Pictures for a sequel based on Murder in Amityville by Hans Holzer. George sued De Laurentiis. See, I keep thinking I'm saying it right. I'm not sure. George sued De Laurentiis, I think that's how you say it, actually, and ultimately lost, unfortunately, but succeeded in having posters placed in theaters stating, "This film has no affiliation with George and Kathy Lutz." Outdoor shots were filmed at the same house in Toms River that the previous film used. Before production began, it was decided a set would be created for this movie, and the interior of the Toms River house would not be needed. The reason for a set instead was because the production crew had to ruin the house a few times through the movie, the original film, in other words, most notably the end of the film. It is also believed, and for those who've seen this, I think you guys would probably know another reason why they chose not to film the inside of the house like they did with the first film. It is also believed that during filming of the first film, the fake blood that ran down the walls reportedly stained the walls. Indoor scenes were filmed in a studio instead in Mexico. Now, I thought this was kind of cool. I don't know if a lot of you guys know this about this particular film. I'm sure a lot of us have seen Amityville 2, The Possession, but Ed and Lorraine Warren served as demonology advisors for the film. Also, this film is considered as the darkest and most frightening of the Amityville saga. Now, fast forwarding, less than a year later in 1983, Amityville 3D was released. Due to a lawsuit between the Lutz family and Dino De Laurentiis, which he also produced this film, over the storyline, which did not involve the Lutz family, Amityville 3D was not initially promoted as a sequel, and the name Lutz is never used in the film. However, the film does make a reference to the original Amityville horror story. The character of John Baxter is loosely based on Stephen Kaplan, who I mentioned earlier, and who at the time was trying to prove the Lutz's story was a hoax. Like the previous installment, exterior scenes for Amityville 3D were shot at the same house in Toms River, where the first two films were filmed. The interior was once again filmed in a set in a Mexico studio, which I think, based on the appearance, I think they used the same exact set. I mean, just by looking at that film, it looked like almost like they never really took it down to begin with. A good portion of the studio that they used in Mexico, it pretty much looked exactly the same. I mean, whether they knew another film was probably going to be needed or not, that's I have no idea. But however, when they started shooting the scenes, the exterior scenes, the filmmakers, believe it or not, almost never got the house to film at again because it was scheduled to be picked up and moved over one lot. They were just able to film the exterior shots before the house was moved. And finally, because I'm not gonna go over all the films, understandably, I'm only going over the ones that actually had the house featured in it, which by the end of this slide, you guys will understand why. In 1989, Amityville 4, The Evil Escapes, was released on NBC television, which this was also the first Amityville film to be released on television instead of theatrically, because the first three were released theatrically. And it was based off the novel Amityville, The Evil Escapes by John G. Jones, which was the start of fictional sequels, which inspired several movie sequels in the 90s. The replica of the original Amityville house this time was located in Wilmington, California. A facade was added to the side of the house to give it the Amityville appearance. The interiors of this house were filmed also. Now, I got to be honest with you. If you guys haven't seen Amityville 4, The Evil Escapes, although the house does not really, believe it or not, I'm not trying to be a spoiler here, the house does not make a full appearance like it does in the first three movies. In fact, the house only makes an actual appearance really just for, I would say, the first 10 minutes of the film. The rest of it then focuses on a possessed lamp that gets moved to California. So, and then very briefly, they do go back to the house, but only for like 2 minutes. So the entirety of the entirety of the house making its full appearance in this film is really just like 12 minutes for the most part. But the cool thing about the house that they shot it at, though, especially in the interior, even though the house in Wilmington looks nothing compared to the original, to the actual 112 Ocean Avenue, the interior actually does. I mean, it really kind of did look like the real interior of the actual Amityville horror house, which I thought, honestly, in my opinion, it was, I thought it looked a lot more creepier than what they used for the interior of the house in Toms River, New Jersey, and also the Mexican studio. So I think they should, if you look at it, I really think they should have just filmed at that house, because I think the interior of that one's a lot more creepier than the interiors that they used for the first three films. Now, and again, the reason why I'm not covering all of them, understandably, is the films after this were about cursed items recovered from the rubble of the torn down house. Now, I only got a few minutes left, so let's see. Oh man, I think we're gonna have to make a part 3 out of this. Okay, so yeah, let me just see. Let me just go over some of the comments here. All right, so who do we have here quickly? What's up, Chantel? Thanks for tuning in. What's going on, Natalie? Yes, it definitely is, Jeremy. It really is. All right, let's see here. There was a special on the house on Monday. They were talked about 1970s investigation by Ed and Lorraine Warren. Oh, I didn't know anything about that. I'm gonna have to check that out. Hey, what's going on, Carrie? I think the story has fascinated just about all of us. So, Yeah, it's always on our minds a lot. What's up, Eileen? Yucky toilet. I'm not sure exactly if this is still Robin here or if this is somebody else. So you have to let stream you have to give StreamYard permission to do so. All right, let's see. Could it be possible that the Lutz family were doing stuff that they shouldn't be doing and it had backfired on them, causing them to run and when they fled? And when they had whatever they had brought in had left. Jeremy, because considering that I still have a good portion of the slideshow left, and yes, I got it. I'm going to say this now. Will there be a part 3? Considering that I only got 5 minutes left of this particular presentation, yes, I kind of figured there was going to be a part 3. So, yes. So I hope you're excited about that. You remember that night when when we went through all those movies? Yes, Jeremy, we went through all of that. That was crazy. Yeah, he names a few of them: Amityville Theater, Amityville Scarecrow. It's just like crazy here. Like, give me a break. Like, what the hell are these people doing? Oh, I see Vivian saying, I see that Wild Bill's on. Okay, so what we're going to do here to fill up the last 4 minutes is I'm going to share the screen one more time. I was originally going to show all the trailers. Well, not all the trailers of all the movies, but the trailers of the movies I just mentioned. But because we only got 4 minutes left, I'm just going to share the screen. So to show the original film. So just give me 1 second here. Okay, let's see. All right, so here is the. Oh wait, no, that's not it. Oh, that's weird. Hang on 1 second here, guys. I got to stop this for just a second. I don't know where the trailer. That was a different trailer, but we can get that fixed very quickly. All right, so now there's an ad playing, so I got to wait until until that disappears. So that gives me time to share the screen one more time. Let's try this again. So here is the trailer to the original 1979 film, The Amityville Horror.
It's the kind of house they don't build anymore. A relic of a time when the world wasn't in such a hurry. When there was still time for a little charm and elegance. It has stood empty for a long while. And at the price, it is a bargain. For a growing young family, it is almost too good to be true.
What do you think?
I love it.
James Brolin, Margot Kidder, Rod Steiger in the Amityville Horror. God's peace in this house. Get out. Get out.
Hello?
Hello, Kathy? Father Delaney, there's something very important.
Mommy, I want to go home.
What do you want from us?
What's going on? We have to do something.
I'm coming apart! Oh, Mother of God, I'm coming apart!
28 days after the Lutz family moved into their dream house, they were running for their lives. unspeakable. The Amityville Horror.
Wow. Absolutely a classic movie. Unfortunately, as much as I would like to get through more of this, sadly, I'm out of time. So I'm only just going to stay here for just another minute. But just before we do, as I always do before, of course, like I said earlier, I actually do have an actual copy of the novel by Jay Anson, along with also the original Amityville horror film, which if I had more time, I would have actually presented the full collection I have. So, but unfortunately, I got to end this. So I just want to say very quickly to everybody, thank you guys so much once again for tuning into this. This really means a lot. This was something that I think was going to definitely get a lot of people's attention. And I got to say, I mean, I never thought again that we were probably going to end up with a part 3 for next week. So obviously, I don't really need to tell you too much about what we got going on for next week. So I think you guys get the idea. And again, I can't thank you guys all enough. So and thank you, Vivian. I really appreciate everybody tuning in. So this has been quite a show. So honestly, the more parts we got for the show, the better, because I got a few other slideshows that I will be presenting that we'll definitely be able to fill in the slots as the weeks go by. But Amityville, though, I think this one is going to hold the record for the longest continuous slideshow that I have. So yes, indeed, Jeremy. But as for the rest of the movie trailers and the videos that I have that I was originally going to present tonight, I just don't have much time. But we'll have I'll definitely have them ready for next week. So again, thank you guys so much. You guys all have a great night. Let's see. Natalie, looking forward to yes. Anyway, all right. Thank you guys so much. You guys all have a great night. And also, I know it's only Wednesday. Also, happy Easter to all of you. And I will see you guys next week. You guys all have a great night.